Okay, so we're going to talk about the wheel and how to use it. Some of the things that are really important at first is getting that clay onto the bat as close to the center as you can. So to do that, I'm going to throw it down, then I'm going to make sure it's centered. If it's not, I'm going to go ahead and pick it up and throw it back down near the center. And use my left hand as a guide to kind of push it on there. And then I'm just going to kind of slap the clay around, make a cone, get the sides of it nice and smooth so it'll be a little easier as I go. Now, before we go on too much further, it's really important to talk about stabilization. This is, I think, one of the most important things about using the wheel is to make sure our body's stabilized and our arms aren't flapping around the side, your hands aren't bouncing around. To do this, you want to sit a little closer to the wheel. I try to get as close as I can to it, and then I raise my feet up. So I'm going to get up on top of a block of wood or something if I have a taller wheel, just so my legs come up a little higher than how they do. Then I'm going to pull my elbows and keep them stabilized in against my body. So I want to get my elbows in against my hips, and as I do so, I'm going to try to make sure my arms don't shake. I'm going to try to hold them still. I like to tell beginning students to just flex every muscle they have in their arms, but pull backwards, which seems weird. Normally we think, okay, if I need to stabilize, I'm going to push forward into it. But if we actually pull our arms back and into our body, and then we use our whole body to stabilize, we're going to have more success not bouncing around and getting that clay towards the center. Next, I'm going to go ahead and actually start to throw. So I'm going to turn my wheel on pretty much all the way as fast as it goes. I'm going to get a wet sponge, get both my hands wet and the clay wet. This is going to help the clay not stick to me, which will cause it to not center. So my first step is to actually kind of push down and in. That helps it stick to the bat, and then I'm going to go up and create a cone. Once that cone's created, I'm going to push it back down until a beehive. Okay, so now I'm going to start the centering. I'm going to use this part of my hand right here. I like to call it the butt of my hand. I'm going to put my elbow in my hip, and then I'm just going to press forward into the clay. And what you're going to see is that clay kind of tip forward. When it starts to tip, I'm going to use my right hand and push it back down. What's important there is to use that side of my hand, not my palm. And then you just repeat this process. So you're going to push forward, directly in front of you, keeping your arm in your hip, and you're going to notice I kind of lean my whole body. That clay will start to tip forward. When it starts to tip, push it back down into that beehive shape. You repeat this process until that clay is centered. Now, how do we know it's centered? That's always the tricky question. I like to look at it. If that clay looks like it's making a perfect circle, it's not wobbling or making an oval, that's a good indicator to me that it's centered. If it looks like it's just kind of a little bit more of an oval shape, then I'm going to center again. So I push into it with that left hand and back down. You can kind of see that little bit of a wobble that's going into it. That's telling me that the clay is not really centered. So I'm going to push in the clay again with that left hand. Once it starts to tip forward, I'm going to push it down with the right hand. Again, this process just gets repeated until that clay is centered. Nice, easy movements. Then you're going to want to take your hands slowly off the clay. And anytime you're going to put your hands on or off, you should make sure you do it slowly. Going quickly can actually take it off center, and that's always frustrating. So here all I'm doing is just kind of coning that clay in again, or making it a little narrower, because what I'm going to make, I don't want such a wide base. So now we have that clay centered. You can see it's moving around in that perfect circle, and that's going to allow me to move on to my next step. The next step is called opening. So this is where I'm going to actually create that hole. So now I'm just going to add a little water to make sure my hands don't stick to it. Then I'm going to take my middle finger or index finger, I'm going to use my hand and rest it onto my left hand so it's stable. And then I'm just going to gently start pushing my fingers down into the center of the wheel. Now when you do this, you do want to slow your wheel down a little bit so it's not going at full speed. And then you're going to stop. For beginning students, I like to stop around a 1/2 inch, and then we'll trim the rest away. So to check, you just take your needle, stab in around the bottom, and then where it ends is how deep it is. So I'm at about that 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to flatten out that bottom, and I want to make sure the bottom of that clay isn't looking like a bowl. It's more looking like a plate with a cylinder around the side of it, going straight up. So to do that, you just pull your fingers straight back as you open, and you don't really want to curl them up. Now I'm just kind of pressing that bottom down, cleaning out the water, tightening it up. So now I can start my pulling process. So to do this, I'm going to use the side of my finger, push in with the clay on the outside, just kind of pinch it with the sponge and pull straight up. I don't want to go out and I don't want to go in. We want to try to make a cylinder. This is going to be true with no matter what we make on the wheel. We want to pull and we're going to go straight up. You can see that ring that's created. That's from pulling that clay. So my right hand is pushing in the clay into my left hand. And then you're going to cue off the top. So you can kind of see I make like a cue with my fingers. And I press it down on the top just to kind of help compress that lip down so it doesn't get too thin. Now I'm going to do that again. So my right hand pushes in the clay at the bottom. It's pushing into my left hand. And I'm moving that clay up towards the top. Now you'll notice I'm keeping my arms stable so they're not bouncing around. I'm pulling right at about 3 o'clock. I'm not letting my hands gravitate towards 12 o'clock. We want to try to keep them on that side and stop our hands or arms from bouncing around. You can throw your pot off center at this point, so you do want to slow the wheel down a little bit, push in gently, and make sure you're actually grabbing that clay though and pulling it up. See, I'm just really pinching that clay between my fingers and moving consistently towards the top. One problem a lot of people have is they're going to move at different speeds. That's going to cause different areas of your clay to be thick or thin. So if we move at the same speed all the way across, we're going to have more success with the walls being the proper thickness and not getting weak spots in our clay. When we do this, I'm using about 3 pounds of clay, and I should be able to get it as tall as my wood tool. That's really telling us that we've pulled our walls thin enough, but we're going to check it. So I'm just going to take my needle, kind of stab in the side of the clay, pull it out, and I'll see how thick it is. I should be around 1/4 of an inch on the base of my side wall. Once we have that, then we can continue to that kind of shaping phase. There's lots of different ways we can accomplish this. I just add a little bit of water so I can slide my hand into it. I'm going to actually make this just a teeny bit thinner. So I'm just going to do one more pull, but this time I'm going to go ahead and actually shape. So it looks like pulling, but it's really not. What I'm doing is my left hand is actually going to be pushing out, which is going to create that belly of the vase. So it gets a little wider. If we want it to get wide, we're going to push out with our inside hand. That left hand will get pushed out. Now I'm switching over and I'm using a rib tool. This is a metal rib. I like them because they're pretty flexible. I can get a lot of shape out of them. So that rib is just kind of curve into the shape I want. And then as I move up, my left hand is going to push into that shape. When you start shaping, it's really important that you always move up. Don't hold in one spot. You just want to do a little at a time. So now I'm doing what we call collaring in. So I want it to get a little narrower now. So I'm going to start a little lower than where I want it to get narrow. I'm going to gently squeeze my hands together and push up. So I'm squeezing my hands in and moving my hands forward. Okay, so I squeeze the clay in and I move up. That's going to create a little narrower of an opening, that kind of vase shape we're looking for. You can see I have kind of that belly. It didn't look too big of a belly until now when I start narrowing it out. Now when we start to narrow out anything on the wheel, that clay is going to get thicker. So sometimes you end up having to pull again. You can see there I just pulled just that top half that I've narrowed out. And then I'm going to go ahead and just keep coloring in. we're going to make a pretty narrow bottleneck on this. So I'm just going to do a lot of collaring and then kind of repolling, collaring and repolling until I get to the shape that I'm looking for. Now I'm going to go ahead and fine tune that a little bit more, so I get my rib and I put a little bit more of a bend to it and start kind of curving that belly and burnishing it in a little bit, getting more of a fine-tuned shape. Now I'm going to use the other end of my rib tool, which is a curved edge, and I'm pushing in just to kind of help clean that up a little bit and help me get the shape I'm looking for. As I'm doing this, that clay kind of gets a little tacky, so I just add a little bit of water to my hands so my hands can slide across the clay. If my hands stick to it, then I can off-center it and destroy the whole thing. So let's get a little bit more water on there. I'm going to start down low, gradually squeeze my hands closer and closer together, creating a narrower opening. And then I'm actually going to hold my hands still at the top for a couple things. I want to put a little bit of a twist into the top, and I also want to show you what happens if you don't keep moving. So if you don't keep moving, you're going to get this little twist in the clay. You get a weak spot and it'll start to fold. So a lot of times you can just cut that out. I wanted to kind of have this little bit of a twist to it. So I held there, and then I'm just kind of lightly pushing down on it to get that fold and twist into the clay a little bit more obvious. And then I'm going to go ahead and work on trimming that bottom out. So I'm taking my wood tool, cutting into it a little bit, and getting that base of this vase to be a little bit narrower. I don't want it so wide at the bottom, so now I'm just cutting some clay out of it. I can use this tool to remove that excess clay, and then I'm just going to go back in and kind of clean all that up. Okay, so now I'm going to make what's going to look like a foot. So I'm just cutting a little bit more clay off there, creating that little tiny ring at the bottom. Then I'm going to stick my wood tool under my vase just a little bit, kind of lifts that ring up. I'm just going to kind of help define it. I made it a little too large, so I just cut some of that off. But I'm just going to go back in and do the same thing. So I'm just going to cut a little clay off that bottom edge to create just kind of a little lip. And you stick your wood tool under it. And then I'm going to take a sponge and I'm going to kind of clean that area. I'm just using that sponge, just lightly pressing into the base of it, smoothing it out, making it look nice, clean, and professional. Then I'm going to take that sponge and just kind of clean up the sides a little bit. Get some of that excess water off, a little bit of that kind of slippy clay. And I am just kind of lightly pressing into it as well. And then I have my little vase here. I am going to do a little bit more work on the top once it sets up a little bit more. So now I'm just using the rib to do those final little touches in there, get rid of some of those finger marks or throwing rings, burnish that clay so it's nice and compressed, a little tighter together. And it does kind of shape it a little bit more. You can see I'm taking just a teeny bit of clay off there, using that rib again around the belly, cleaning it up, and I can also clean up that ring around where it's going to be the foot. That's what I'm doing here. I'm just using the edge of that rib, cleaning it up, fine-tuning that shape as it really starts to come to life now. Okay, now I'm going to get ready to cut it off. So I turned off my wheel. I'm just going to take my wire tool. I'm going to wrap it around my fingers, hold it really tight, flat against the bat, and pull from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. Just one nice fluid motion, and that will detach the clay from the wheel. And then I'm just going to pick up my bat and set it off to the side until it gets leather hard. and then I can do a little bit more work on it. I am going to go ahead and make those folds a little more though, so I'm just going to take this little block and just gently push down just a little bit and kind of turn it while it's still a little wet. You can see it just kind of increase that fold a little bit more. But then I'm going to move it over here to this leather hard stage. From this, I'm going to do a little bit even more compression. It's really going to be the same thing though. I'm just going to take that block and kind of gently push down on it. Okay, now I'm going to pick it up, and I have my stamp on the bottom there. You can kind of see that foot we've created. I just use my sponge to kind of put a little bit of a dent into that bottom so it reads kind of as a foot. And then I have my initials into my base. And here would be what we're looking at as our finished product.